Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be engaging in creepy Yorkshire folklore in Starve Acre and then trying to sustain a brilliant new Chicago restaurant in the third season of The Bear. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Well, in the last couple of weeks, I've been going somewhere where we haven't often gone for this podcast, and that is ITV drama. I feel like we might have done it in 220 episodes, but I can't think of exactly when.
I'm sure we've done at least one ITV show, but I can't think of one off the top of my head.
No, but the thing I've gone to ITV drama for, perhaps predictably, is the latest show by, let's call him on-off podcast favourite, Stephen Moffat. This is, of course, Douglas's Cancelled, his new 4-part miniseries on ITV, starring Hugh Bonneville as a news anchor who finds his world starting to fall apart when he makes an off-colour joke at a party and it gets reported on Twitter. And yes, this, due to the network of secrets and lies around him and his family, this one little thing starts to slowly unravel his entire existence. And yeah, this is a new sort of comedy drama by Stephen Moffat. It's very much leaning back towards the old coupling days, if anything, although it has got quite a few cast members from Doctor Who. Well, quite a few. It's got Karen Gillan as Hugh Bonneville's co-anchor and Alex Kingston as his wife. So yeah, a couple of Doctor Who actors and also Ben Miles from Coupling, who played Patrick in a prominent role. So yeah, definitely into Stephen Moffat territory here. He's, bringing back some of his old players. And yeah, this is fun. The first couple of episodes are kind of silly farce, kind of in the way you'd expect from Moffat, to be honest. As I say, kind of coupling-y, kind of just stupidity building on stupidity. This person's stupid decision unlocks some dark secret this person has been holding, which drives this person to do that, and everything just escalates in this stupid way. And then in the second half, it takes an unexpected turn into drama. It's very much, when I say this is a comedy drama, I mean literally 2 episodes of comedy and then 2 episodes of drama. It's
okay, interesting.
A very literal approach to the brief. Things, take a sharp turn around the halfway mark, and we get into there's still a few jokes because, it's Stephen Moffat. He can't keep jokes out of his mouth. But we start to tackle some quite depressing subject matter. You might spend the first 2 episodes thinking, why is Karen Gillan doing this quite small part as the co-anchor in this drama? And then you eventually realise why she's there, and it turns out to be quite sad. You actually feel genuine emotions by the end. It's a very strange show, a bit of a glaring tonal shift. And there are moments where it does very much fall into the box you'd expect. Like, I suspect if I pitched to many people, it's a Stephen Moffat drama about a man being cancelled, they would probably go, right, well, I'd rather die than watch that, which was very much my partner's reaction when I said I was watching this. But
yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I'd rather die than watch that, because I am interested in Stephen Moffat and his, writing and things like that. But I was a bit concerned, ooh, could this be middle-aged man yells at cloud territory? What is it?
It's a bit of both. He's, I think, trying to chart a bit of a middle course in that there are both characters who are slightly caricatured examples of cancel culture, and there are also some people who end up getting cancelled who, frankly, thoroughly deserve it and are punishing the unpleasant. Like, I guess I shouldn't spoil the twists in this because, as I say, it's a farce, at least for most of the time, and a lot of the humour is in exactly what happens. And there are, as I say, some big twists about halfway through that take it into darker territory. But yeah, it does get into the fact that, yes, some people are just monsters, or some people are kind of arseholes who kind of deserve it, even the ones who come across as well-meaning. There is some nuance in there, but there are also some jokes that are fairly barn-door cancel culture jokes. But then again, the people saying the stupid, uninformed things about cancel culture are arguably the sort of old, set-in-their-ways, middle-aged folk who you'd expect to. Like, you wouldn't expect Hugh Bonneville to be, or like someone of Hugh Bonneville's age to necessarily be hugely enlightened, and sure enough, he often isn't. It's more nuanced than you'd expect, but there are also some of the fairly broad shots at cancel culture that you might expect.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's fair enough from a writing perspective. I suppose you want it to be even-handed, like, basically not feel that, like, Moffat is just written this in order to basically just have a go at the people he doesn't like who've been having a go at him on Twitter. The one thing that's been floated, and we'll see if it happens or not, is the one that's going to be like probably the terrible example of this is apparently John Cleese is writing an anti-woke sitcom. Yeah, so that's obviously just going to be John Cleese wants to insult young people with kind of lefty opinions, and it'll just be like a one-sided tirade and probably not that funny. But I guess what you kind of want from this sort of show is the humour to punch in every direction. I think it was Rick Mail, possibly, who said good satire punches in every direction. So yeah, basically, some jokes about cancel culture and, I don't know, young people and their views, but also some jokes about some dinosaurs really are over the hill and have like horrible opinions and kind of the world's left them behind and they're grumpy about it. So if it's dished out fairly even-handedly, then that seems fair.
A little bit, yeah. I think if you're watching this, to be honest, the biggest danger, I think, with this is that because it sort of starts off quite broad and gets more nuanced as it goes along, I would perhaps understand if someone watched the first episode and thinks, well, this is exactly what I expected it to be, fuck this. And, fair enough, he could have put the more nuanced stuff at the top, but he chose not to. And that's a decision that has been made.
Yeah. It's got a good cast and like a good selection of people in it and things like that. And yeah, we know Moffat is a good writer. He doesn't seem to be someone who's just possessed by grievances that he wants to grind, like John Cleese, for example. So I can imagine he could handle this well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the third episode, which is probably the one where the slightly grimmer themes come to the fore, is probably the best one, and it's probably the one that's hardest to watch, actually. The worst thing about it is there's some extreme... Yeah, again, I'm really, really dancing on spoilers here, but it's just... It ends up being about extremely creepy men, and it really makes your fucking skin crawl.
Well, just say, when Moffat's writing is on point, it is really on point. He is a great writer and can really make you feel, from horror to comedy. He can, really press your buttons. So, yeah, I can imagine he could write that scene very well, because he is, at the end of the day, a talented screenwriter.
I mean, I think the backstory of this, as I understand it, this is obviously potentially apocryphal, is that this was originally an idea for a play, which he has converted into a TV drama. And you can see that watching it. It is very long scenes in the same sets, like the creepy bit I mentioned in episode 3. It's basically the entire episode. It's basically one very long scene with a few short breaks. Again, I guess a testament to Moffat's writing that he can make that work. These incredibly long scenes. It helps, as I say, he's got a very good cast.
Yeah, and he's got some experience as a playwright. I think he had a comedy show on the West End called Unfriended, I think.
The Unfriended,
Something like that, yeah. Yeah, no, he's got experience of that. I could believe this began life as a play or things like that. I suppose it's a character drama, so, it's not like something like Doctor Who that involves sets and locations and effects. It's like something that's about characters interacting in a variety of spaces. It's the end of TV that is more similar to the theatre. So I can kind of see how that would work. Yeah, I mean, he is always an interesting writer. Even his sort of less successful seasons of Doctor Who always had something interesting or clever in them that was worth paying attention to. Even like, the last show, the David Tennant one with the woman locked in the basement, which we reviewed in the podcast. I felt that we said that, like, when it was good, it was extremely good and very, very tense. It just was also quite silly at times. So yeah, I feel that like he can always bring some of the genius that you see in things like Blink, for example, or Silence in the Library. There's always like that sprinkling there. It never quite goes away, which is why it's always worth, I think, engaging and taking seriously anything that he's written, even if he is like taking on cancel culture as a middle-aged man.
Yeah, I think it ends up, as it perhaps inevitably does, being more about these specific characters than cancel culture as a whole.
Yeah, I think also that would work well. I guess it needs a hook to hang it on to sell it, but actually, again, if you say it's like a farce, what you're actually getting is a story about these specific people and their specific stories and the specific jokes and quirks of their humour. But obviously it needs something bigger to get people's attention, because watch the show about these characters you've never heard of, it's not really marketable, is it? So it needs something that's like a talking point.
What's interesting in some ways is during some of the more grim sequences towards the end, there is a slight sense of genuine anger in there, which is something I don't always associate with Moffat's work, to be honest. Although it was kind of tangible in that Doctor Who episode he did recently, Boom. That felt like he was a bit annoyed. I mean, maybe he's finally been hanging around with Russell T Davies long enough that some of the righteous anger has rubbed off on him, who knows?
Yeah. Well, it's always good to hear a writer or an artist express genuine emotion. That's usually when their stuff's at their best. When they're really tapping into something they want to say. And you can quibble about the specifics, but actually, someone really like laying out their case. Moffat's been around in TV for a long time, so I guess he knows the dynamic, and, he's the sort of person who can do a TV show about TV without it becoming like self-congratulatory cycle of TV people in the TV world make TV show about TV.
Well, yeah, it's very possible that these are things he's encountered, and therefore he has, personal reasons to be angry about them, yeah.
Yeah.
As Alistair said, it's interesting. If you are a Moffat watcher or someone who's enjoyed Moffat stuff, this is an interesting next step for him, and as ever, I remain intrigued by what he's going to come up with next. I don't actually know what's lined up next. Oh, he's doing the Doctor Who Christmas special, isn't he? That's what's lined up next.
Which I'm sure we'll be discussing on the podcast. Interesting that, yeah, this is on ITV, not BBC. Also, by a big coincidence, bizarrely, I'm also watching an ITV show or something that's on ITVX, because I don't watch live TV at all anymore, just on-demand TV. So yeah, it's bizarre that two shows like ITV coming up at the same time. But I've been watching Totally Completely Fine, the Thomas and Mackenzie comedy about suicide. So yeah, it's bizarre. Yeah, they do have some good stuff on there, I guess.
They're a whole channel. They've got to make something I want to watch occasionally. Although, at least on my TV Skybox thing, the app really is dog shit. I had to restart it every time it tried to run a commercial break. But anyway, that's probably not that interesting to the listeners.
Yeah, and there are a lot of commercial breaks.
Yes, there are. Yes, there are.
I'm glad that Moffat still remains relevant, rather than I don't know, disappearing off the scene for good. I guess, yeah, it's also good that he's back with Doctor Who, and I don't know, maybe he's settled into a groove now that he's no longer TV's darling and went from, he can do no wrong to he can do no right. Maybe he's kind of, established an even keel going forwards.
It feels like he had a bit of a bad time during some of the midsection of his Doctor Who run. I think he was finding it all quite difficult. But yeah, hopefully he's, chilled out a bit. I mean, I guess he doesn't really have to try and, do 1,000 relevant things at once now, can he? He can sort of enter the age as some sort of, TV elder and just produce this occasional projects when he feels like it.
Yeah, I did feel that show running Doctor Who and Sherlock at the same time was probably too much work for one person.
It did sound like he was very close to burning out quite badly on that, yeah.
I mean, I think at one point he tweeted they were rehearsing Sherlock, and in the breaks he was writing the Doctor Who Christmas special, and I kind of feel, is this the ideal environment to deliver both to a high standard? I don't know, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that's what I've been doing. Alistair, apart from that other show on ITV, what have you been doing?
So yeah, I have for you now a preview of a forthcoming film. So I've seen the film before it's out. If you listen to this podcast on the day of release, this will be a film that comes out tomorrow. That's Friday.
It's like Mark Commode or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Finally hit the big times. Right. Very paying to see a preview screening. But yeah, I've seen The Outrun, which is a new film starring Saoirse Ronan, based on, I think it's Amy Lipton's memoir of her recovering from alcoholism, and her moving from London to Orkney, where she grew up. It's a very beautiful film. It's very sad. It's very touching. It really does a good job of showing the contrast between London and Orkney and the differences between them, but not in a negative way. Yeah, very positive way, kind of showing the difference between life in both of them and how life is good in different ways in both places. But I guess for this character who needs to get away from the chaos of London, Orkney's what she needs for her recovery. And it's really interesting. It digs into the folklore of Orkney, and there's all sorts of bizarre asides and about the marine biology of the area, the climate, folklore and traditions. So there's all sorts of bizarre asides about sort of strange Scottish island chain. And also the bits about alcoholism are very powerful and very sad. It really shows how alcoholism, especially at the extreme end, how destructive it is, how it drives people insane, basically makes them dangerous and violent, and how difficult it is to really, really stop drinking when you're at the extreme ends. Obviously, all this undercut by an amazing performance from Saoirse Ronan, it makes it all very believable. So if you want something that's grim and depressing, but also uplifting, then I can recommend this film.
Okay, I've seen the trailer for this, and I don't know. It looks like one of these films that's very well made and very worthy, but I'm probably never going to watch, in all honesty.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of... I don't know if this is a trend or just the sort of ongoing strand that just continues to bop along in cinema. In most given years, there'll be at least one film about someone finding themselves after some sort of life disaster among some nice scenery.
Yeah, I feel it's it's a trope maybe, or like a subgenre or style of filmmaking. I guess it helps to have somewhere visually interesting for your film. So such as Orkney in this case. I feel this is more though than the kind of the misery memoir film. There's something I think more to it than this. So they've just gone beyond basically someone has breakdown due to alcoholism and then recovers. There's, I think, a real element to do something more interesting, like you say, with the way it dives into the folklore and the science and the weather and stuff at Orkney. It's more than just I don't know, a place she goes to in order to get sober. It's a real sense to bring a sense of place into the film. And I also, one of the other interesting things about it is it has a techno soundtrack, because the main character sort of, when she was in London during her heavy drinking, was sort of immersed in the techno scene there. So the whole thing has a techno soundtrack, mainly of her walking around Orkney listening to music on her headset. But it does work really well as a contrast, and also to bring the Londonness into Orkney, to have the techno soundtrack alongside the kind of beautiful wild landscape. So that's something that's interesting.
Yeah, that stuff does make it sound at least a bit more, I don't know, idiosyncratic, I guess. A bit less indulgent and straightforward. Yeah,
and it takes it beyond a misery memoir as well, yeah.
And Saoirse Ronan is, normally very good.
Yeah, I think she's what makes this exceptional. that it's just her performance really like, yeah, real believable, real humanity. She does, yeah, the alcoholic side really well, does the kind of the recovery side. Yeah, she really brings this to life. It's a performance-based film. Yeah, you show up to see her, but she does, deliver an amazing performance, as she always does. She's possibly one of the best actors around today. I think Steve McQueen just said that she's the best actor around right now, so that's very much part of this. And yeah, so yeah, I can recommend it on that basis.
So does this have like a dual narrative? Like we see her with Orkney in the present day, whilst the extent of her alcoholism unfolds in flashback in A Second Strand. Is that the sort of thing?
Yeah. It's that sort of done, yeah. So it sort of plays with time, jumps around with time, and obviously, yeah, there's things like, I think it's like inspired by her memories and stuff. So yeah, she sees something that reminds her of something, and then you get a flashback and things like that. And it kind of, in different bits, it pieces together the London story. Like, yeah, it doesn't move in chronological order. Like, yeah, one of the early bits you get is the moment of her deciding to get sober and entering a treatment program in London, and then as it goes on, it fills in the immediate events that led up to that in a sort of patchwork thing, as well as various different bits from her life. It's kind of got an overall sort of, the trajectory, I feel like the narrative structure is kind of reminds me a lot of Fleabag. I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, but yeah, I guess it's not really a film in for the plot, in that the kind of, rather than coming as a big bang right at the end, the kind of lowest moment, or like, yeah, the kind of real moment of pathos comes kind of roughly in the middle. And like one half of the story is kind of the build up to that, and the other half is sort of her sort of slowly rebuilding her life. It's similar structure that really reminded me of Fleabag. And yeah, I remember when we were discussing Fleabag, you saying that like My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, sorry, it's just Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, isn't it? Yeah, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend has a similar structure, which is that like, yeah, there's a kind of rising out from the low point towards the end, which I think is, again, an interesting way to structure this sort of film.
Well, yeah, I guess it's in some ways it's the classic narrative, isn't it? You have, yeah, in film and whatever, at some point, like towards the end of the second act, that you have the low point, and then they rise like the phoenix.
Yeah. But I guess it means that the ending itself doesn't bring the emotional fireworks, I suppose. Like, the crucial breakthrough doesn't come right at the end in your kind of Act 3 climax. And the final bit is a kind of, yeah, sort of steady improvement. But yeah, and there is a sort of, yeah, a wrap up at the end that pays off one of the main plot lines and stuff, which is quite nice. But yeah, it's got an interesting structure, and it's kind of, again, similar to Fleabag. It kind of has that sort of life affirming detail, which is like people sink low, but they can sort of crawl out of it, and kind of they can crawl out of it and, kind of rebuild their lives. And there's a sort of redemptive, sort of metaphor to the whole thing, which is life affirming.
So is that a good comparison then, Fleabag? I mean, I guess Fleabag was always a comedy, wasn't it? Fleabag was always angling for the occasional joke, whereas is this quite as jokey?
No, it's definitely not as jokey, although there are definitely moments of humour. Like I say, it's not like kind of wall-to-wall misery, again, like a lot of misery memoirs. There are sort of like, yeah, moments of humour and things like that, and if there were people laughing in the screening I attended at various moments. Again, I think it comes back to Saoirse Ronan's performance, in that she can bring the humanity and bring moments of warmth and humour to what is like a dark story, to make it not just a one-note misery memoir. But yeah, I guess in kind of narrative structure and the kind of emotional tone, striking a sort of Fleabag is a sort of thing. And like, yeah, there is something, I feel really like life-affirming, say, about people like, kind of getting back on their feet after these big meltdowns and things like that. I get the feeling a lot of this comes from the book, which is also written in a sort of unusual way, shoots off in different directions, brings in folklore and science and things like that. So they certainly managed to capture what was, I'm sure, a difficult book to film well. And yeah, I'm quite interested to read the book at some point.
Well, yeah, but that's what you want from the best of these sort of films, are they? I'm not necessarily slating the genre. It's just not something I choose to spend a huge amount of time on.
Yeah. There's a lot of films out right now. Lots of interesting stuff going on. So yeah, like we're about to discuss Starve Acre and things like that. So if you only go to the cinema once a month, or, once a quarter or whatever, maybe don't run out and see this, want to wait for the streaming or something like that. But if you're really interested in Orkney and folklore and things like that, then definitely one to add to the list. It is beautiful. And yeah, maybe it might be one that comes around again at Oscar time, because obviously there's a great performance in this film.
Yeah, it does sound like something which might have Oscar potential, depending on what else is going on. I don't know. I'm sure the Oscar field will be covered at great length on this podcast when the time comes.
Yeah, my concern is that Saoirse Ronan is brilliant and hasn't won an Oscar yet. I think she's been nominated twice, if not 3 times. But she's got 2 films that are probably in contenders for the Oscar this year. This and Blitz, directed by Steve McQueen, which is opening the London Film Festival this year. So she might end up splitting the ticket if she gets like 2 nominations. That's has happened.
Can the same person get nominated twice?
They can, yeah, and it has happened.
Oh, all right. Didn't fully realise that was a thing.
It's definitely happened before. It's rare, but you're allowed to nominate in your category. and the films and performances that get the most nominations go through. Yeah, if you have two films in contender that both end up in the top 6 performances, you can be nominated twice. But the problem is then you're just splitting the ticket when it comes to the final round, when the nominees are pared down to the winner, because if she gets nominated for Blitz, say, there'll be probably a lot of Caddy members voting saying like, well, partly on the strength of the Outrun and past performances as well. But if you've got 2 nominees, it can be difficult. It does happen. It's rare, but it does happen. I can't remember the last time it did happen. Was it Christoph Waltz? No, that was a different thing. That was one film got nominated twice. The ticket can be split. But anyway, we'll see what happens. Possibly that the Oscars will overlook this obscure British film, because it's not about the Second World War like Blitz is, which they do love a Second World War film. But let's see. But yeah, definitely an interesting film, one I can recommend if you're interested in the subject matter, and it's well done. Don't be put off by the fact that like this is just another misery memoir film. There is more to it than that.
Okay, and speaking of folklore, it's time to do Starve Acre, a new British folk horror film written and directed by Daniel Cocatello, based on a novel by Andrew Michael Hurley. This is a movie about a couple played by Matt Smith and Morfydd Clark, who are living on Matt Smith's family's estate in the West Country with their young son, when he starts to experience strange blackouts and strange moments of, well, extreme violence. And yes, everything just starts to feel a bit odd around them, until finally things explode in a string of increasingly odd and haunting events that eventually build to a devastating climax, which we probably shouldn't spoil, at least not yet. We've both seen this film. Alistair, what did you think?
Yeah, so it's got a really good creepy atmosphere throughout the film, which I liked. There aren't many bits where it sort of tips over into outright horror, or as I think we described in the past, the sort of pants-shitting horror. There's only like one really big jump scare. I assume people know what I mean by like pants-shitting horror, the sort of really like kind of, fight or flight, I want to hide behind the TV, behind the sofa.
Do people know what I mean by pants-shitting? Let's talk about it more.
Yeah. Well, I think, it paints a vivid picture of a certain type of horror movie. But yeah, this only has like one big jump scare. It doesn't quite get that intense. But it does go off in interesting directions. There's some unexpected twists, which we can get into after we just talked in more general terms about the film. I did really like the rural horror aspect. Like, there's various allusions to other horror films, things like that. There's lots of, references to things like the Green Man, sort of, folk and pagan traditions, lots of creepy rural goings on. It's very atmospheric, but I guess the overall, it did leave me wanting a bit more, maybe a bit more plot, a bit more scares. A kind of a film that got me excited but unsatisfied. But I would still recommend this, especially if you, again, like your rural horror, Wicker Man type vibes, because it's got that.
Yeah, last episode we reviewed the movie Cuckoo, and we spent a lot of that time saying that although it had some interesting ideas, it never really committed to them and never really had like a strong feeling or atmosphere or became anything other than a sort of vaguely generic action thriller with horror elements, because it just didn't really commit to any aspects of its aesthetic. And this film is definitely at least avoiding that trap. It does go fully into this sort of creepy, atmospheric, rural horror thing where you just get lots of long, lingering shots of plants and find yourself staring at them thinking, is that an evil plant? So, yeah, it's not making the Cuckoo mistake. It's definitely picking an aesthetic and successfully achieving it. The actors, especially the lead pair, Matt Smith and Morfydd Clark, are definitely, aware of the type of film they're in. They both do a very good job in different ways of appearing haunted and staring out over the countryside, unsure if this is, a beautiful, tranquil environment or a thing that's trying to kill them. As Alistair said, it kind of fizzles out a bit, or as I think the friends we saw the film said, it runs out of steam a bit towards the end. There is a certain sense of, oh, was that it, when it finishes? But it does build its atmosphere very well. It's very good at the aesthetic. It just, ironically, the one thing Cuckoo did do quite well, Cuckoo did at least have a plot that built steadily to a logical conclusion, whereas Starve Acre perhaps doesn't quite have that sense of dynamic plot and ends in a way which makes you think, oh, that feels like I've just been watching, like, I don't know, a 4-part TV miniseries, say, and then it just got cancelled after episode 3.
Yeah, there is that vibe to it. Again, I felt there was probably like another 20 minutes or so of plot when it ended. In fact, and it was so good and I was so into the atmosphere that I could have happily sat there for another 20 minutes and watched more horror stuff, especially if it built. I feel that, like, what it's missing is really an ending. Yeah, I mean, it reminded me of a lot of great horror films I really liked. There were definitely vibes of Don't Look Now, which could be my favourite horror movie, The Omen, some vibes of that, Wicker Man, Midsummer, that's pretty much a list of my favourite horror movies right there. But however, what all of those have is like a big moment at the end, like a twist and something unpleasant and nasty at the end. And if you're familiar with any of those films, the ending will be jumping to your mind right now. And this film just doesn't have that. The ending, you can discuss details if you want after a bit, but like there is a nasty bit at the end, and it is quite nasty, but it's not, again, the ending of Wicker Man, Midsommar, Don't Look Now. So there's an expression, always leave them wanting more, but I guess don't leave them wanting this much more.
Yeah, no, it just didn't go quite far enough down, I don't know, the rabbit hole. It does a very good job of, as I say, showing you strange, slightly off, ethereal shots of the countryside and making you feel like there's a darkness lurking beneath it. But I kept waiting for them to really dive into that darkness, and instead it sort of got to the point where they were just starting to uncover it, and then it just stopped.
Yeah. Again, like, Don't Look Now does that well with Venice, Wicker Man with the Scottish Islands, Midsommar with Sweden. But they all have that more to it than that. But yeah, I thought the cast were excellent, as you said. Like, it's really well cast. I like Matt Smith and Morfield Clark. They're both kind of ethereal, slightly strange-looking people. And the way they've sort of costumed and like hairstyle and stuff is done for this is really good. And like they're kind of perfectly cast for these people who kind of look a bit strange and otherworldly in this sort of strange and otherworldly film. And I really bought into their marriage and their relationship. I thought they had great chemistry together, worked really well together. I thought that there's a sex scene at one point which I thought was really well done because it really just showed lovingness rather than, I don't know, erotic desire. Not that it wasn't there, but it really showed them as like a loving couple, and I thought that was well done. I mean, again, that connects to Don't Look Now, which has a sex scene with a very similar vibe in it. But yeah, I thought the cast was excellent and they did a really good job. And yeah, I thought they were kind of perfectly done.
Yeah, I mean, as a relationship drama, it's very good. It does a good job of showing this couple and the strains that are placed on their relationship, and the way they sort of want to connect with each other, but a lot of the time can't quite do it. I mean, maybe to an extent, I don't know, I should be looking at this film more as a relationship drama than a horror film, and I shouldn't be looking for it to make me shit my pants, and I should just be, looking for, an insight into the relationship, and maybe that's what I meant to take from the ending, I'm not sure. But as you say, Matt Smith is very good. Matt Smith does a certain sort of seething under the surface, sort of struggling to stay still, sort of barely holding his emotions in check vibe very well, and there's a lot of that here for him, and he's, as a result, very good in it.
Yeah, he's quite stoic in this film. There's very little dialogue, but conveys a lot in just mood and looks and things like that, and his behaviour is excellent considering, he sort of hasn't had the best run of luck with roles post Doctor Who. I guess he's been in The Crown, which is very, very successful. I really liked him in a stage production he did during COVID that was on Zoom called Lungs. So yeah, he's got real talent, and yeah, that's on show here.
Well, with this and House of the Dragon, maybe his luck is finally picking up. Who knows?
Yeah, and he's very, very good in that as well. Things like that. Just needs to act opposite a sort of blonde ethereal woman in something vaguely supernatural, and it's all good.
Yeah. And Morfield Clark is good as well, and I say this as someone who did kind of find her Rings of Power character a bit annoying in season 1. Not yet watched season 2. Don't know if I'm going to.
Yeah, it was more. Well, season 2 is more of the same. But anyway, we're not reviewing that. But she is definitely elfin. There's something about her that, I can see why she was cast as an elf in Rings of Power. But yeah, again, she's perfectly cast for a folk horror film in that she does have this kind of, elfin, ethereal, otherworldliness to it. She plays a sort of slightly hippie-ish character, I think, quite well. And it's not especially here, but someone with a sort of a spiritual side. And there's a really good sort of seance-y scene that is generally one of the creepier bits of the film. Again, she does a lot with quite sparse dialogue and things like that. Very moving. She really conveys like sadness, isolation, loneliness, all the kind of creepy vibes you need for a horror film. Yeah, this film is very much sold as these two big name British stars are in this thing, and yeah, they are the main draw as well as the tone. And yeah, if you're someone into geeky media, I'd recommend going out and see this because, it's got two mainstays of geek culture right now, but doing like something a bit different, but also that's very good and interesting.
Yeah, as I said, if you're just in it for sort of these two actors playing off each other in this relationship, then that part is, that's the good part. That's the part of here that's worth seeing. If you just come to it for that, then you probably won't be disappointed.
Yeah, there's some good interesting twists. I don't know how much detail you want to go into it, I guess, because it's a horror film, so the plot is important. For the suspense.
I mean, the plot is quite sparse in many ways. I mean, I don't know how much paper I'd need to list the actual things that happen in this film.
No, exactly, yeah. But, it doesn't go in any of the usual horror movie directions. And even the trailer, I felt kind of structured it more as a kind of a traditional horror movie plot arc, I guess, because that's how they were selling it and things like that. And it meant that when I watched the film, I was surprised by some of the twists and turns, and that kept me aware on my toes, and also, was exciting, interesting directions. I mean, there's various different points when you're not sure which of the two is the evil one. Most horror movies do a thing like creepy stuff happens, the tension builds. At one point, basically, one of the main characters becomes possessed or whatever the particular lore of this film is, and then tries to kill the others. If it's not a straight up there's a monster film, like we're running away from that thing, like Alien, for example, but if it's one when like it's more about supernatural possession or whatever, one of them becomes the evil one and the other one has to try and like run away from that person. And I like the fact that at this point you're never really sure, like at some points it's Milford Clark is kind of being creepy and weird and slightly demonic, and then it switches to Matt Smith, and then it switches back, and like it kind of keeps you guessing. I was waiting for the moment when like Matt Smith suddenly like switches and gets an axe down and tries to kill his wife and then and then it becomes a kind of chasey horror, that kind of horror film at the end. But it doesn't do that, and it goes off in other weird directions, which I guess we can spoil or not. But that was at least interesting and different. So, again, one of the interesting different things the film did.
Yeah, it is doing, as you say, interesting different things, which is why part of me feels bad for, I don't know, moaning about feeling slightly underwhelmed, but them's the breaks. There's some horror stuff involving a hare, a sort of creepy hare. Which, is it a rabbit or a hare? It's one of them.
I think it's a hare, but it's not really made explicit.
And that stuff is, I don't know, it's very conceptually creepy. I wasn't sure how creepy it was, or it always was in execution, because the rabbit itself, the hare, rabbit, whatever, is just a little sort of a little animal that sort of sits there. It's a strange sequence. I kept sort of waiting for the hare rabbit to wig out and become a like full-on demon hare rabbit, but as Alistair just said regarding like people being chased with axes, it's just not that sort of movie.
And it might have got a bit Monty Python, I suppose.
But
The hair is going for my throat. The other thing is, like, I didn't know much about this film going into it, and I do like to approach films that way, but I kind of suspected, and then at the end it popped up, like, based on the book. I was like, I can see it's based on the book. And there's some bits when, like, I can just see how this would be brilliant on the page, and it is underwhelming to possibly a little bit naff on screen. Like, there's a bit, this isn't a big spoiler, like, there's a bit when the hare creature, they release it back into the wild to be with its wild kin, and it just sort of, as it runs away, it just sort of stops and turns and stares at them and conveys this sense of intelligence and malevolence, which I can imagine in a book you could write that really, really well at the sort of edge. Like, is that like animal actually staring at me like an aggressive person in a bar might, sort of thing? Like, I can imagine that working brilliantly on the page, but on the screen, I think someone behind us did actually laugh, because this is a bit like dun dun dun. Like, hopefully that sound effect contained the
I think that told everything we need to know about you, at least. Carry on.
The slight air of silliness that, like, again, the problem with horror is that it can tip over into absurdity, into funny absurdity. I remember, did we watch the last, yes we did, the last Blair Witch film, when there's a skeleton that comes out at one point and people actually laughed in the cinema because it was just like, looked like a skeleton doing a little skeleton dance?
Well, I believe much has been written about the thin line between fear and comedy.
Which is why things like Night Vale and Legal Gentlemen and whatever work really well. This is nowhere near as bad as the last Blair Witch film, and I'd even say this is good. It's just there are some moments that I'll be nice to the film and say failed to land certainly as well as they did on the page. I can really imagine someone reading and go like, oh, that's a really great scene. It's like, not everything survives transition to the screen. So the hair, although creepy, not maybe as impactful it was. And also in some scenes it's clearly an animatronic, I guess. I understand that why, because in the past they'd had a real hair, but probably one that had been like, I mean, say the past, like the 70s or whatever, when some of the great horror movies come from. They'd used a real hair that had probably been abused and terrified into behaving as they wanted to, but obviously we don't do that anymore with performing animals. So in some scenes it was clearly an animatronic and then looked a little fake, but I guess that's part of the course. They don't have Hollywood budgets to make a fully CGI rendered hair, and we don't torture animals for entertainment anymore, which is probably for the best.
That's a different horror movie, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the problem is Starve Acre is, a very good film which has very lofty aims in a lot of ways. It's clearly trying to do something quite elevated and interesting. And I don't know if we're quite getting into interesting failure territory, because I feel this film's too successful to be called a failure. But yes, it just doesn't quite nail everything it's trying to do. Yeah,
exactly. And I did really like about it that it has the tone and vibe of a horror film, which is great and really atmospheric, but doesn't engage in some obvious horror tropes and things like that. Like I say, it suddenly becomes The Shining basically, and Matt Smith gets down an axe and tries to murder his wife. We've seen that film, and this is trying to do something different. But yeah, I think the most apt comparison are movies, as I mentioned, like Midsommar, Wicker Man. Yeah, especially those two, they also riff on like folk horror stuff. That like they have that kind of big moment at the end, which this doesn't. And I think that is, this could have been the new Wicker Man, which is what I was hoping when I saw it, but it's just not got what that film had.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's the noise we make whilst shitting our pants with horror.
Sorry, I don't know why I've turned this into a bizarre sound effects thing. Maybe I'm talking like I would in the pub where my facial expressions would help, but this is an audio medium. I mean, like,
maybe you just really need to go to the toilet during the break. Who can say?
yeah. But I'm trying to convey, I guess, the what this film has and lacks in emotional tones, and things like that. And rather than a impenetrable 2,000-word emotional essay, I've gone with whoa.
I'm sure the few listeners we still have after 200 and something episodes know what you're getting at this point.
Yeah, I hope you're enjoying this content. Excellent stuff. But I would recommend this film as it comes out. And we talked about there being a lot of films around right now. We mentioned The Outrun, and I think if you're going to the cinema, I'd see this over, Cuckoo or some of the other things that are around right now. This is good and deserves our support as an independent British film, trying to, do something that Britain struggles to do, which is compete in the big genres of like horror, say, news antics, which is so dominated by big American horror movies, like Alien Romulus, which is good, but like this is really going for a very specific, distinctive vibe, which I liked a lot.
Yeah, if you're into your folk horror, and this definitely has that atmosphere and does a good job of pushing it to its logical conclusion. And yeah, who knows, maybe in a few years' time we'll get to see Matt Smith get the axe down when they make Starve Acre 2, Hungry Hectare.
Hungry Hectare.
There we go.
Copyright that now.
In the spirit of the thin line between horror and comedy, that was a truly horrific joke. Okay, and last but definitely not least, it's time for Season 3 of The Bear. This is, of course, the incredibly well-regarded TV show about Carmen Bizzato, noted chef, who returns to run his brother's old beef sandwich spot and decides to try and convert it into an upmarket bistro to, really enact his personal culinary vision. So this is his story and the story of the people who work beneath him and deal with the, it turns out, incredibly loud, angry, high-stress environment of the modern restaurant. And yep, the first 2 seasons were pretty well regarded. I think certainly on at the top end of the best of year TV charts for most people, including me. So yep, we're back for the 3rd season. Well, I say we're back. This actually came out in, I think, like June, July, but due to me being heavily booked around that time, we're just getting around to it now. Alistair, what did you think of this?
So this great drama show is still great, is what I have to say. It still brings the goods. It's really entertaining. All the things you liked about past seasons of The Bear are there, and some new developments as well. I think this show's really great at creating these like little emotional story in every episode. I mean, each episode could be like a play. There's the one about them getting the restaurant ready for a photographer coming. There's the one about how Tina joins the restaurant. There's the one set entirely in a hospital delivery room when Nat's having her baby. There's the final episode, which is primarily taking place at the last meal done by this famous restaurant called Ever that's closing down. Each episode is kind of packed with its own little like story of drama and pathos. And it is really funny. This is like, it's a comedy drama, and it is genuinely really funny, but in a sort of weird offbeat way. Like, there's a whole thing about being haunted in this one, which is not like by ghosts, like in Starve Acre, more like a sort of weird psychological haunting stroke prank that some characters do. It's very funny, or just as a scene when the character Sydney just getting angry at a big pile of cardboard boxes. And also can be really sweet. There's a plot line about Marcus's mum dying and, the plot line about Tina joining the restaurant. It's really sweet. So yeah, it's kind of gotten a real smorgasbord, to use a kitchen reference, of emotional delights from drama to comedy to sweetness. So yeah, I mean, I got some criticisms. I'm sure we'll get to those. But overall, another great season from The Bear. Yeah,
no, I really enjoyed this for the most part. As you say, it's got this sort of theatrical vibe of focusing in often on characters within a confined space. I mean, it sort of develops that over the years. Like, the first season was more about the general cacophony of this kitchen, and it seems to have got more and more into these sort of theatrical character studies as it goes along. And yeah, there's some great ones this year. All the ones you mentioned, I thought the one with Tina Tina and her, I don't know, her bear origin story, featuring a cameo from Batista from Dexter as her husband, was extremely good, as was the episode in the delivery room with, I think, Sugar, Carmen's sister, and their mum. And perhaps the notable thing about this is a lot of the best parts of the bear are the bits that don't necessarily feature the titular bear himself. Although at this point, I think we have to assume that the bear refers to the restaurant and it's more of an ensemble show. Because although Carmen is still the lead, he's not a dominating one. There are a lot of episodes in which he barely appears, and the show still functions because it has become this sort of general piece about all the characters, and it works really well. I think the more it's become this sort of ensemble piece, the slower the pacing has become. I think I have seen a little bit of, after 2 years of it, standing atop the TV discourse like a colossus, I have started to see a bit of, I don't know, bear backlash this year. A bit of, I don't know, has it jumped the shark? Has it finally become too slow and pretentious? And I'd seen that discourse before I even got around to watching it because, as I say, took me a bit due to my my incredibly busy life. And yeah, I don't know. I mostly found myself still loving it. I think the first episode possibly goes a bit too far off the is anything actually happening in this cliff. For me, it felt a bit like a previously montage stretched out to a whole episode. It was extremely well made, but I was like, could this not have been like the first 10-15 minutes of an episode instead of a whole one? But I must admit, after that, they got back to, regular bear episodes, and I was pretty much all in.
Yeah, that was one long montage for an episode, and that's, it's slow paced, it's kind of arty, it sort of sets the tone for the season. But yeah, and I've seen the kind of have we reached peak bear discourse, but I kind of like the kind of weird ways it shoots off in different directions, and it doesn't have that like incredibly tense tone anymore. They only use that guitar riff from Refused once in this season, and it was like the staple of like the first season. And yeah, I like these little episodes that like about, the one Kami's not in, the one about Nat stroke Sugar having the baby, or the one about Tina with her real life husband actually playing her husband in, which I looked up. So yeah, a nice cameo for Dexter fans there.
I did not know that. Fair enough.
There's lots of good stuff, and even though I've seen a bit of backlash, I still think the show is still great. Really good drama, really entertaining, got its bizarre humour, and I like the kind of weird like bits of like, long musical segments and kind of very thoughtful introspective bits. I like all of that. So although I do feel some criticisms, such as the main thing is I kind of wanted more of an ending, a kind of complete story for this season. Like there's quite a lot of plot lines that are thrown out and not resolved. The one with Claire's not resolved. The plotline about the review is not resolved, and it's kind of done as a next season. Plotline about Sydney formally joining the partnership, not resolved. I kind of wanted more resolution at the end. So
the ending did have a slight feeling of sort of, I don't know, June Part 1, Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, Infinity War. Sort of just accept that this was basically half a TV season.
Yeah.
Except that this is basically The Bear Season 3 Part 1, except we're calling Part 2 Season 4.
Yeah, that's basically what you're getting.
The pacing has finally got so slow, but we just need to basically accept that we can only fit half a season into our season of television.
Yeah, and I'd rather them do their own thing. Do this this tone and the introspective bits and the kind of aside episodes and all of that. I'd rather them do that rather than being like, right, we got to tell a concise story within 10 episodes. And, a lot of the episodes are only half an hour, so it's quite short and sharp. So yeah, I like that they're doing their own thing, and I want them to do their own thing rather than stick to some kind of, I don't know, like sacred cows of television writing, like you must have a complete arc plot for every season or whatever, or emotional journey for each character. And there definitely is a journey and progression and lots of stuff happen. I wanted a bit more conclusion, but I still like what they're doing and I want them to keep doing it, at least for another season.
Well, yeah, it's one of these things about I'm sort of interested in the auteur journey of this show. Like, it's definitely grown into this sort of slow theatrical character study thing over the course of its run, and I'm interested in where it goes with it next. I mean, who knows? Maybe the showrunner is watching all this backlash on the internet and has decided to change his writing style in response to it. We'll see what happens when season 4 airs. But it's definitely something I find entertaining. I definitely like his willingness to slow down a bit. I mean, I think with some horror movies and stuff, you want to sort of show the worst case scenario quite early on, and I do sort of feel the sort of intense chaos we used to get in season 1, where every episode was the most stressful thing that could possibly happen to you, and it just got worse and worse as the season went on. I feel like they've sort of, after heavily exposing us to that in season 1, it's become this sort of worst case scenario in future seasons. It's become something they only bring out when they want to, make us feel bad. It's become something they kind of build up to rather than something they do every week to give it a bit more punch. Like last season, it only came out really at the end, and in that really, really, really stressful flashback episode with the whole family.
Yeah, and that was very much the tone of the first season, and I like the fact they've moved on tonally, rather than just doing the same thing again and again and again and again. or else it would just A, be exhausting, and also B, be like, right, you can do the trick of this is what it's like to be in a stressful kitchen, like the kind of the uncut gems thing of like the drama is so good and so tense that actually this has stopped being fun to watch. You know, again, they need to move on from the tone, and like some of the great ones in like this season was like the ones when they didn't do that. Like in the last season, I liked the Copenhagen one that was like quieter and things like that, and I liked in this season like the one about giving birth with the mum could have been a really, because the mum is a super stressful character, you know, as we saw in that Christmas special they did in the last season. They could have made that a very, very high tense stressful episode, but actually it's quite sweet and emotional, and the characters really go on a emotional journey, and the tone was very different. So yeah, they're really like evolving and adding more tones, and yeah, the sweetness definitely wasn't there in the first season, and it's really running through this season with quite a lot of episodes, especially about parenthood, when they get that tone right.
Well, yeah, and a lot of the thing that makes this show work is sort of the character growth, the sort of feeling that there's a very real sort of coherent journey going on. Like Richie especially, I guess, is probably the most conspicuous character for growth and advancement as he continues to quietly try and become this sort of new improved version of himself in season 3 and try and actually, sustain it through the difficult process of actually running this restaurant. And yeah, even though he doesn't actually, I think, get quite as much of a spotlight episode this year, it's still kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and he's clearly growing as a person, which you can see through like the bits when now, you know, he's accepting that his ex-wife and the mother of his child is moving on and getting married again and things like that. You know, he's really showing growth as a person, and he's no longer the sort of angry, confrontational person he was before. But also, yeah, at the same time, you know, he's still got that core essence to the character, and his growing dislike of Kami is not because, as it was in the first season, they just butted heads because they were different people. Now he's starting to see how dysfunctional Kami is as a person and is worried about the effect it's having on the people around him. It's showing real growth. Yeah, and he's got one of the most interesting journeys as he's been on as a character. And I did like him the last episode when he got to reunite with his fellow serving staffer Eva, and there was a nice moment of them all together. What this show is really, really good at is hinting about deeper relationships between characters. And that was really, really good. And like, even sometimes there may be like characters you don't know particularly well. Like they introduce a character who'll turn up for one bit as someone's brother or someone's uncle or someone used to work with. And the show's really good at giving you a vibe that these characters know each other and they have a shared history, even though this is the first scene they've done together, or they only get like 1 or 2 seasons together a season. Especially in the final episode when like it brings in all these different chefs and different things. Like this is the first time that the Will Poulter character, who had a 1 episode cameo in the previous season, he's back in this season. First time he does a scene with Jeremy Allen White playing Kame, and together they're like, you know, they just really convey the sense of these people really have a shared history. It's very believable, even though we've not seen them together before and they've only been, the Will Poulter character is a very minor character, but it's always good at conveying the depth of these relationships. And you get that again with when Richie, when he reunites with the serving staff, who again were only in 1 episode before, and they only have like a couple of scenes together in this one, but you still get the sense of the connection and the relationship and things like that. So that's one of the things the show does that's very powerful and does it well.
Yeah, and it also in the last episode brings in the Joel McHale character, Kami's sort of former boss / abusive mentor, who's been sort of cameoed and hinted at throughout the entire show's run, and finally actually appears in the present day narrative in this episode. And yeah, again, even though that character has barely appeared substantially, it still comes across as this massive sort of pivotal confrontation. And yeah, again, as you say, they do a good job of hinting at that entire past dysfunctional relationship, and well, I guess I'm building on the parts of it they've shown in flashback, especially in that montage I mentioned. And yeah, as you say, it just really feels like develops relationships between real people, which is one of the things this show is good at, and one of the reasons why it's so compelling, even if they're not shouting quite as much anymore.
Yeah, and also, going back to what I was saying about I wanted more resolution and climax, that scene was seemed like a moment of resolution and climax. Kame finally confronts his tormentor, who's responsible for a lot of his mental health problems and anxiety in general, bad behaviour. And actually, yeah, that had a real sense of a climactic moment. You know, you confront your abuser, you say all the things you want to say or try to in those moments. And that, yeah, so that was really good. Again, yeah, it's just like one small scene between like character who's not in it very much, but they've done a good job of really efficiently building up these broader relationships. I am a little concerned that like the bear is kind of expanding outwards, and now there seems to be like a whole universe of characters based around this restaurant ever that they all seem to work out. That's a kind of supposed to be the best restaurant in the world, or one of the best, 3 Michelin stars, concept driven menu, all the rest of it. Their head chef being played by Olivia Colman, and she's really, really good in this. It's the antithesis of all the other chefs. She's quiet, she's soft-spoken, but she's still brilliant. And then now they built this whole universe with all these other characters, and they all weave together, and there's bare lore at this point. And I like all that stuff, and it's good, and it's makes it seem realistic, but I'm concerned. I don't want the focus to drift too far away from Kame and the bear and the focus on them. It needs to stay focused on that. They're adding more layers and more depth and more detail, but they do need to keep the balance right. And I don't want it to continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger at the expense of Kame and the core characters, Sydney, Richie, Nat, the rest of them. They need to make sure that remains the focus.
I mean, they've closed the other restaurant down now, so job done.
Yeah, I guess, but that's kind of the characters. Those characters are still very much in motion and part of the broader universe of the bear. And, I'm not saying I don't want to see them again. I'd like them to come back, but I just feel that, like, there's been a continuing expansion from season 1, which is pretty much entirely takes place in just the kitchen of the bear. Expanding, in this one they introduced, like, more friends and other characters. I think Richie's ex-wife's new husband is a new character in this season. Been brought in, played by Josh Hartnett. Again, it's a good one-scene cameo. Things like that. They've added more friends and stuff. There's a lot more. And a lot of these are some of them are cameos from famous actors and stuff, or well-known people from things like Community popping up. They're kind of broadening it out, which again makes it realistic. These people aren't the only people in this universe. There's a complex web of friendships and relationships that expands throughout the cookery world and this bit of Chicago that they're all from. Again, as they make the tapestry bigger, they just need to keep in mind that I can kind of see the focus drifting a little bit away maybe from Kami to the point where, like, I'm not saying it's a criticism. I guess I'm laying a foundation for potential future criticisms in a sort of pretentious critic way, if that makes any sense.
Well, I think what you're talking about is probably one reason why the pace has slowed down a bit, which is the source of a lot of other people's criticisms. So, who knows? Maybe by the end of season 4, you'll have gone fully over to the bear has jumped the shark camp. Maybe,
we'll see. Or maybe, like, this is a bit when, like, it's expanded outwards and you've seen the totality of this universe, and then it's going to, like a lot of great stories, it's going to come crashing in for, I don't know if the next season's the final one, bring it all back to Kame, Sydney, Richie, Nat, the rest. Yeah, I do like the cameos and stuff and the ones they pop up, and they are good fun and stuff. I thought, again, John Cena, a great one-episode cameo. It was really funny. Again, he introduced the concept of haunting that becomes a running joke. John Cena's great. He's very charismatic. He's really funny in this. Big name to get in. Big film star just to pop up, do one scene.
I found the John Cena character weirdly conspicuous. I don't know. A lot of the other cameos, they do quite a good job of sort of blending them into the show. But the John Cena one, perhaps because he's such a big, charismatic actor, was a bit sort of, oh, that's John Cena. There he is, still John Cena.
Yeah, no one else looks like John Cena. He is a very distinctive looking man. Something about him. I guess that's one of the reasons why he's a very successful wrestler and then now a very successful actor. But in everything he plays, you're kind of aware you're watching John Cena. If it's Peacemaker or if it's this guy who you bring in to buff the floor. So maybe that's it. I mean, it's like if Tom Cruise turned up. You're always aware you're watching, or Jack Nicholson. You're always aware you're watching them.
He's a very big actor, which works in something like Peacemaker, which is kind of a violent cartoon. But I don't know, the bear often plays its cards a bit more gently and has its moments land a bit softer, and having John Cena running around is sometimes a bit odd. I don't know. Occasionally I feel they could cool it on the big cameos, but again, we'll see what direction that goes in season 4.
It did feel very much like a kind of old school sitcom celebrity walk-on bit, in that there was a big build-up to his big entrance, and I was watching it on a train with my partner, and I literally said to her, I scrolled back 30 seconds and literally said to her, you got to see this, and showed him, and then she was like, whoa, it's John Cena, and I was like, it goes to show this is a sitcom. It has classic sitcom moments. And there's other interesting cameos. There is a whole host of famous chefs in this, too many to memorize. I'm not really an expert in the world of chefing, but there are some from famous restaurants that I've heard of, and distinctive restaurants. I think mainly in the final episode in Ever, when the main characters sit at a table where almost everyone, not played by Jeremy Allen White, Will Poulter, or Ayo Edebiri, was a famous chef. And it is kind of weirdly shot documentary style. I kind of like, these strike me as chefs, because they clearly just ask the chefs to talk about food, and then it's quite good because it's the sort of introspective and arty thing the show does, just have these long bits of people talking about the importance of food and cooking, cut together with like flashbacks and stuff, clearly inspiring the main characters and their thoughts and their conflict. But it's sort of bizarrely sort of a little documentary full of famous chefs.
I felt like it was probably, I don't know, they may have consulted, I don't know. I don't know to what level of improv there is, but it felt like very precise dialogue. Like a lot of what the other chefs were saying, I mean, partly it's just nice commentary about food, but it was also meant to make you think a certain way about Kami. Like a lot of the way the other chefs were talking about their relationship with their work was clearly meant to make you think, wow, those people have healthy relationships with their work in the culinary industry, unlike our hero.
Yeah, and it relates to Sydney and her concern that she wants to leave the bear, which is one of the main plot lines in this season. Again, unresolved. Sorry.
Yeah.
Bit spoilers there, but anyway. Yeah, and it's well done. It cuts together to like previous episodes when you see Carmi yelling at Sydney and she's just nodding politely while a famous chef talks about how supportive the environment that he or she has created is. So yeah, it all works. It all works, and it's great. And again, it makes it feel more realistic that like Ever is part of the universe of Top Chefing, which is why all these top chefs are there and propping up various points. Like there's a famous chef teaches Carme in a flashback how to debone a chicken for the first time. There's a brief scene when he visits that really famous restaurant in Copenhagen where everything's like organic and natural, and it's like again one of those restaurants always mentioned as one of the greatest in the world. There's a whole Anthony Bourdain documentary on it. So if you know anything about food, like I have again from watching things like Anthony Bourdain and going to a few restaurants in London, I'm hardly an expert, but you can kind of see how they brought in the culinary world into the bear to make it feel realistic and make it feel three-dimensional. Like I say, this show is really good, and like they can drop in like Olivia Colman and Will Poulter for like a couple of bits, and then you get the sense that there's this whole story around in this whole universe, and it all feels very realistic and it's all very believable, which is great. It needs to come back to the drama, which is what is the best thing about the show.
See, I'm not that opposed to them widening the focus a little bit, especially when they only do it in select episodes, because I think that's what good drama and good writing often is. It has a degree of specificity. It feels like the characters actually do exist in a wider world, and it's not just, they only talk about things that relate to the plot. I think the fact that they can go to another restaurant and meet other characters, and it feels like they have relationships and conversations they have relate back to the wider themes of the show is largely good writing. As you say, it becomes less good maybe if these characters then get their own plot lines and start taking over the show, and suddenly it has 27 characters, but since they were only in one episode and that hasn't really happened yet, and that was, I guess, the big budget finale. As you say, it wasn't the most conclusive finale in the world, but the element of it that was big and up budgets, it's finale time, was the sheer number of characters and the amount of cameos. If it's an event, then it's an event, and it's not the entire show, and I can take that. I think it works.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. And yeah, shows like Lost and Heroes, bigger budget, big shows, they go off the rails when they go off too much into, these new characters and their plot lines and things like that. But you're right. What is great about the show is the specificity of it. And it makes it feel realistic and things like that. Like whenever they're talking about the food they're making, there's really technical dialogue and just dropped in, and you kind of have to gloss over it and be like, I don't understand what they're talking about. What microgreens are, or the bakery things they're doing with the pastry chef. But yeah, you believe in this whole thing because they're using specific language, and you kind of absorb the drama and the essence of what's going on, which again, why this show is full of great drama.
Well, yeah, I mean, the obvious comparison for people of our generation is, I guess, The West Wing, a show that taught me lots of political jargon that I still don't understand, but still managed to get the plot across.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same. It's like that in the kitchen, yeah. Again, with these tense scenes, like quick-fire dialogue, back and forths, large cast, things like that, workplace drama, that, on the surface, they seem like quite different shows, and with also like comedy and moments of sweetness thrown in. On the surface, they feel like quite different shows, but there's actually a lot of similarity, which is probably one of the reasons why I like The Bear so much, and I like The West Wing, because I like just being thrown into that world of professionals doing things to a good job, and you kind of pick up the drama and the characters and the details as you go, and you kind of get immersed in it. And I think that's great writing, and that's what I really like.
Yeah, again, maybe it's a shallow comparison, but yeah, maybe there is something to the West Wing Bear crossover, a certain level of this character drama in a very specific world with a certain level of theatricality in the writing. So yeah, still good.
Yep, it's a good show. I'd recommend it, and I am excited for the fourth season. And I do like that this is actually something that they do a season every year regularly, so I'm looking forward to 2025 for season 4.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if the Bear will finally become so big a deal that they can't get a season out of a year anymore. Like, isn't Ebon Moss-Bacharach, who plays Vichy, is now one of the leads in the Fantastic Four movie? Is that going to stop them finally getting a season out every year? We'll have to wait and see.
Plus, Jeremy Allen White and Ayo Ibibiri's careers continue to skyrocket as well. Yeah, we'll see, but it's good. I'm back. I'll be back for another serving of Bear next year.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe in your podcatcher of choice. While you're there, please leave us a review so that others can find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can get other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and written pieces by Nick and myself. Head over to the website now, and you can find my deep dive into Star Wars and the political writing of philosopher Hannah Arendt.
And if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so at MFV Podcast on Twitter, I think the same name on Blue Sky, and we're also on Facebook as Moderate Fantasy Violence. Sign up now and hear about what we've been watching and if we've managed to record the podcast this fortnight. You could also follow me on various social networks, to be honest, mostly Nick Bryan on Blue Sky, NickMB on Twitter, and nickbryan.com on Instagram. Realistically, if you just search my name, you should be fine. Sign up there for all the latest news about my self-published comics. New Kickstarter coming soon.
You can get more from me, where I'm on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram and Threads by searching for Alistair Ball. You can also get more of my writing at redtrainblog.com and find my theatre reviews at everythingtheatre.com. You can also join us here next time when we will be singing in a insane asylum in Joker 2 with the French name that I'm not going to pronounce. And then we will also be trying to bail our brother out of prison whilst dealing with some corrupt cops in Rebel Ridge. Join us in 2 weeks to find out what we made of those two films. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.